Hey everybody, as promised, I was going to make a video about connective tissue, so that's what I'm about to get into now. Um, Hope everybody enjoyed their Memorial Day. Hope everybody enjoyed their week so far, and hopefully I can shed some light on a few things dealing with connective tissues. If we have enough time, talk a little bit about muscular tissue and nervous tissue, and I'll try to drop another video shortly, maybe talking about the review for the test. And I'm definitely going to be sending you guys some stuff to help you review for the test at home. So without further ado, let's go ahead and change up the screen share real quick, let you be able to see what I'm seeing. And we're going to go ahead and move on to display the PowerPoint presentation. And let's go to slide 32, dealing with connective tissue. I really want to kind of take that apart a little bit. Hopefully you're seeing what you're seeing a lot more than what I'm seeing right now, because I'm getting a blank page. There we go. All right. So what's the deal with connective tissue? Well, first of all, hopefully you listened to the video on epithelial tissue and you kind of understand the epithelial tissue really is there to cover and protect, and it's made completely and totally by cells. In epithelial tissue, you're not going to find a whole lot of extra stuff involved. As a matter of fact, most of the stuff that's going to be involved in epithelial tissue are just the cells themselves. So think of specially shaped Lego bricks that you can piece together that covers and protects things. Connective tissue is a whole nother ball game. Connective tissue does not use nearly as many cells to be involved. It's more than just the cells. It's more about the cells that create the tissue, the protein fibers involved, and the matrix that the cells and the protein fibers happen to be suspended in. So it's kind of like looking at a bowl of cereal. Probably the thing that throws people off the most about connective tissue is that there's so many different types, and none of them are the same. They really don't have any similarities to them except that they all have a specialized cell. They all deal with some type of protein fibers, and they're all suspended in some type of matrix. And the consistency of these matrices can either be fluid, or it can be flexible, or it can be solid as a rock. So let me tell you this right off the bat. If you're trying to learn something about connective tissue, one of the first things you want to do is you want to understand their overall generalized functions. Because once you understand the generalized functions, you can relate that back to the cells that are involved, the matrix that's involved, and the protein fibers that are involved. And then you can see how the both sides of the fence make sense. Now I want to throw something at you real quick. Did you notice that I keep mentioning the specialized cells, the protein fibers, and the matrix? Okay, I'm mentioning those for a reason. If you take into account those three things, it'll teach you a lot about a connective tissue. People have characteristics, things about them that stand out to you, things about them that, when you learn about them, you come to understand how that person rolls, how that person functions. You've got that one friend in your group who you can count on for this, and you got the other friend that you can count on for that because of their characteristics. Things in their character that you can pretty much rely on and that kind of define what they do, who they are, how they are. Tissues are no different. So like for this first slide, you notice that one of the functions of connective tissue is the binding of structures. Well, that ligand is referring to a ligament, and I'm pretty sure you've heard of ligaments. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Now, contrary to popular belief, ligaments aren't really there. They're not really there to help you move. They're actually kind of more so there to resist movement, because if you go beyond a certain range of motion, you notice that you wind up tearing a ligament. So no, ligaments are there to connect bone to bone. That's the most common type of ligament. Do we see ligaments in other places? Yes, we do. You have ligaments that are holding all your internal organs in place right now, so that they don't just go and flop all over one another and mix up with one another and get tangled up with one another. So, but primarily we usually see ligaments, the typical ligaments that we talk about, especially in this class, are ligaments that attach bone to bone. You've heard of an ACL. An ACL is a type of ligament. It's actually connecting the bones on your knee. So you're talking about ligaments. These connect bone to bone. And if you've got something that's got to be strong like that, it's going to be a connective tissue. Now, if this type of connective tissue, this ligament, is going to be strong, then the category of connective tissue that a ligament will probably fall into is probably going to be some type of dense connective tissue. Now, if what I'm saying is like, whoa, that sounds like really off, it's probably because you haven't had the lab on connective tissue yet. If you go back and you review the stuff that you talked about in the lab, you find out that connective tissue falls into multiple different categories. And one of the types of connective tissue is a dense connective tissue. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it's a dense connective tissue, and we call it dense because the protein fibers in the tissue are densely packed together. A tendon is another type of dense connective tissue where the protein fibers, collagen, are densely packed together, and tendons connect muscle to bone. So with tendons connecting muscle to bone, when a muscle moves, it moves the bone, and then the bone moves you. Then you have dense irregular connective tissue, which actually connects your skin to the muscle and bone below. This is what holds your skin down. If you ever notice that when you move, your skin goes right along with you. You don't have to worry about your skin ripping apart from your body, unless this is an extreme case, an extreme circumstance, which gets extremely gross. But in normal situations, when you wake up in the morning, your skin doesn't rip apart and lay there in the bed and says, yo, I'll get back with you when you get done. No, your skin goes everywhere that you go. And one of the things that keeps you connected to your skin is dense irregular connective tissue. And you can tell by the name irregular that this is a type of dense connective tissue where the fibers, the protein fibers, they run in an irregular pattern. See, ligaments and tendons, they only pull in one direction. That's it. So since they're pulling in one direction, all the little ropes or all the little protein fibers are all running in the same direction, back and forth. Whereas dense irregular connective tissue has an irregular pattern, and the connective tissue protein fibers all crisscross all over one another. Because your skin gets pulled in multiple different directions. If you don't know about that, just think back to your childhood and think about the wrestling and playing and rambunctiousness that you got into. And with that being the case, it's no wonder we still have our skin. Another type of connective tissue is used for storage. I would probably say the two types of connective tissue that you see here, with adipose tissue being the major energy reserve. Adipose tissue is a connective tissue. All right. Adipose tissue, connective tissue, we usually call it fat. Adipose tissue is made up of specialized cells. These specialized cells are called adipocytes, and adipocytes tend to store triglycerides in their cytoplasm. Now, I want to pause for a minute. This is going to sound like I'm totally going off subject, but there's purpose to this. Please, whatever you do, don't do what I used to do when I was in college. When I was in college, when some teacher said that adipocytes store triglycerides in their cytoplasm, I just kind of just said, oh, okay, and I just wrote it down and went on about my business, not having any clue what the dude just said. So if what I just said is confusing, don't feel bad. Just make sure you write it down and look it up. And what I mean is, go use the glossary in your textbook. Use Google. I mean, if you got your cell phone out right now, write this down on a piece of paper or something, pause the video, and then go Google it. Go Google an adipocyte. Go look at what one looks like. Or look in the glossary in your textbook. Look up a triglyceride. And then also look up cytoplasm. You'll find out that what I just said was that the special fat cell likes to take the fats that we eat in our food and stuffs it in itself to hold on to it for a rainy day. That's basically what I just said. And these special cells who take the fat that we eat and stuff them into themselves so that they can store it for us are called adipocytes. Adipose tissue is great. We use it as padding. We use it as insulation. When I had a coach when I was in college, try to walk up to me and try to talk me into attempting to walk onto the football team in college. And I told him, sir, I'm afraid that you got the wrong guy. And as a matter of fact, you're not in your right mind because, sir, I'm rather skinny and I don't have a whole lot of adipose tissue. And we also know that adipose tissue surrounds your internal organs and gives you cushioning. And without that extra adipose tissue, that would mean all of my internal organs were going to feel every last bit of a hit that I got from a linebacker. No. Bones, they are connective tissue. I know you're probably thinking, whoa, bone is connective tissue? Oh, yeah, it's connective tissue. You know why? Because it has specialized cells in it. We're not to the bone tissue yet, but we're almost there. We'll be talking about 4 major types of bone cells. They're specialized bone cells. You do have protein fibers in your bone tissue. You do have collagen fibers all throughout your bone tissue. As a matter of fact, they build a bone matrix around these collagen fibers, and lo and behold, there's the matrix, the bone matrix. Except this time the bone matrix is not flexible. Not like a ligament or a tendon, or like you're in your skin. No. This tissue is very rigid. It's very dense. Bone is not meant to bend. It hardly has, it's very rigid. It has high rigidity to it. Bone is resistant to bending like that, unless you're a small child. Because a small child, their bone hasn't become very dense yet, so it can still bend. But we'll talk about that when we get to the bone chapter. We have connective tissue that's used for transport, such as blood and lymph tissue, lymph fluid. Lymph and blood are considered connective tissues. You don't really think about blood being connective tissue at all. You think of it as being this liquid. But the specialized cells that are in blood are things like red blood cells and white blood cells. Those are specialized cells. You have protein fibers in your blood known as fibrinogen. And when you get a cut, and the matrix to blood would be the plasma, because plasma is nothing more than 92% water and then 8% everything else. So when you get a cut and you wind up bleeding or something like that, the blood naturally coagulates and it creates a blood clot, which a blood clot is actually solid. It's not liquid like blood is. So what winds up happening is the fibrinogen protein fibers, they activate and they become solid and they become fibrin. And so it makes this solid blood clot. So needless to say, it plugs holes, which makes it a type of connective tissue. Immune protection is specifically for lymph. Lymph is nothing more than the fluids in your blood that have escaped from the bloodstream into the tissues and have been drained into your lymphatic system. So here we see several different connective tissues. I think that because of the holidays, you guys probably missed out on lab. So you'll be talking about this this week. However, you'll notice that several of these connective tissues here, they have something very key to them. You'll notice that there's a structure, a function, and a location over there. But do you notice that most of them, if not all of them, have a specialized cell? Do you see that? And almost all of them have some type of special fiber, like areolar connective tissue. Sometimes we refer to it as loose connective tissue. One of its biggest functions is the fact that it attaches epithelial tissue to a tissue underneath. Never forget this. Areolar connective tissue is always connecting epithelial tissue to other tissues, period. Anytime you see epithelial tissue is not sitting there by itself. If it's supposed to be a layer. If it's supposed to be a layer, there's something connecting it to the layers below it. And that's usually areolar connective tissue. And it's called areolar connective tissue because there's lots of spaces in the tissue itself. And in these spaces, you have numerous different structures and substances which produce multiple functions. So in these spaces in this particular areolar connective tissue that you're looking at now, you'll notice that there's collagen fibers, which are really thick. And collagen fibers are always there for strength and rigidity. Whereas if you look at the elastic fibers in the picture, the elastic fibers are very thin. They're hair-like. Elastic fibers are not there for strength and rigidity. Instead, they are there for flexibility. So collagen fibers give you strength, rigidity, While elastic fibers give you flexibility, they stretch. That's why they're called elastic fibers. They're like the elastic band in a pair of sweatpants. Fibroblast, if you break down the words, for those of you who you do the med term thing, you're going to be real happy because you'll find that fibro is referring to fiber and blast is referring to an immature cell. So this is an immature cell that creates fibers. What type of fibers? Protein fibers. Those same two fibers that you see listed above. And then there's a ground substance, which is more of a viscous type, gooey, liquidy type substance that everything is kind of suspended in. That's why if you scrape your hand and you only scrape your hand down to the epithelial layer of the epidermis, then it hurts, yeah, but there's no bleeding, everything's all good. But then you can scrape down beyond the epidermis down to the dermis, and you notice that things are bleeding and they're gooey. As part of that's probably some of the matrix of your areolar connective tissue there. You have adipose connective tissue. We just finished talking about that. There's that adipose site. Dude stores energy, works as an insulator. He also acts as a protector and a cushion. You actually have adipose tissue around and behind your eyeballs, which doesn't seem like a very important thing, but the way that some folks drive, oh yeah, you need that cushion behind your eyeballs, because when they hit the brakes, believe it or not, there's a lot of force going into your car hitting the brakes. Well, there's a lot of force going into your internal organs trying to go forward. So your eyeballs kind of go forward a little bit, or they could get slammed back. And when they go back into your head, that can cause them to incur some damage unless you have the adipose tissue there to be able to absorb some of that force. Some people don't think about that, but me being a guy who's played some different types of contact sports, you kind of think about stuff like that. You think about those things as well as concussions, and we'll talk about those way later on. Not today. Reticular connective tissue is made up of reticular fibers. Reticular fibers are kind of like chicken wire. And if you've never seen chicken wire before, just Google that sometime. If you've never seen chicken wire, then think of a chain link fence. You notice how the chain link fence has a pattern that the wire kind of goes into? That's reticular fibers. And what winds up happening is you have these fibers that make like a honeycomb, well, not necessarily a honeycomb, but they kind of make this pattern, just like a chain link fence would. And then you stuff other tissues in those spaces to kind of build a soft organ. So you find a lot of reticular connective tissue in soft organs such as spleens, lymph nodes, thymus glands, bone marrow, the liver, things like that. Organs that don't have muscle layers, that don't have bones and cartilage and other things to help protect them. Instead, they're soft organs. Dense regular connective tissue, we talked about him earlier, along with dense irregular connective tissue. Notice that dense regular connective tissue, notice the fibers are going in a unilateral pattern. Notice that the pattern of the fibers are going in the exact same direction. They're following the exact same trend. They're very densely packed together. And by doing that, you allow it to be able to resist stress. And it makes everything a lot stronger. Notice that the primary thing that's in dense connective tissue are collagen fibers. Very little ground substance and a few little fibroblasts scattered here and there. The bulk of this tissue is going to be the fiber. Whereas dense irregular connective tissue, the bulk of it is still the fiber, but notice that the fibers are not running in a unilateral or uniform direction. Instead, the fibers are going every which way that they want. And there's a little bit of ground substance there and a few fibroblasts scattered without. And what they're doing is, whereas these fibers are going in the same direction, so they can only withstand stress from one direction, dense irregular connective tissue has fibers going in multiple directions. Therefore, they can withstand stresses applied in all different directions, which actually makes it quite a bit more durable. Elastic connective tissue is full of elastic fibers, henceforth the name, and the elastic fibers allows this thing to stretch. But here's the thing about it that makes it so cool. Not only does it stretch, but it can return back to its normal shape and size. which makes elastic connective tissue very important, especially in places like in your back. If you looked at someone's spine, you find elastic connective tissue fibers in between the sections of vertebrae in your back. So when you guys start learning the bones in lab, you're going to start learning about the different individual vertebrae, cervical vertebrae, lumbar vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae, and you're going to notice that there are all these little processes, little pieces of bone sticking out from your vertebrae. Well, there's actually pieces of elastic connective tissue that make special ligaments that span in between the processes of your vertebrae. And what they do is they basically let you bend over and then be able to stand back up straight. Yeah. So that's why they tell you to bend your knees when you pick something up off of the floor instead of bending your back, because it's not a whole, all those muscles that you see in your back, those muscles aren't moving your back. Don't fall for that. You wait till we get to lab. We'll show you. Trust me, the muscles in your back are not moving your back. They are really tiny little muscles in your back that are doing most of the back work. Once you learn what muscles are actually moving your back, you will be sorely disappointed, and you're going to learn to have a much greater respect for the muscles in your back. Hyaline cartilage. There's 3 different types of cartilage in your body: hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Most people don't even know that there's more than one different type of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is actually the most prevalent cartilage in your body. So in other words, the one cartilage you got the most of in your body is hyaline cartilage. And what's funny is you find cartilage in a lot of different places. It's in your voice box. It attaches your ribs to your sternum, your breastbone. It's on the end of all of your long bones. So you find it at the end of your femur, at the end of your tibia, at the end of your ulna, at the end of your radius, at the end of your ulna, at the end of your bones in your hands, and bones in your palms of your hands, the metacarpals and the phalanges in your fingers and your toes. You find hyaline cartilage at the end of a lot of different bones in your body, and one of the main reasons why you have hyaline is because it's providing support. In other words, it's keeping bones from rubbing against one another, because bone rubbing against bone is not a good feeling. You don't want that. And so you have hyaline cartilage there to make sure that you don't wear out bone versus bone. Whereas fibrocartilage, on the other hand, it is a cartilage, but you don't find it really in between a lot of things that you would find hyaline cartilage. Fibrocartilage is a bit more rare, although it's the second most common one. Usually you find it in places like in between your hip bones at the pubic symphysis, in areas of your knee joints. But the primary place that people usually remember finding fibrocartilage is actually those little pads or discs that are in between the vertebrae in your back. We call them intervertebral discs. And so when a person says that they have a slipped disc, it means that a section of fibrocartilage in their back popped out. It's not in place. And the fibrocartilage that we're talking about, these discs, are in between each one of your vertebrae. If someone says they have a herniated disc, then that means that one of the discs made out of fibrocartilage has become swollen. It's become inflamed, and it's protruding out of the from in between the 2 vertebrae, which can be very painful because that swelling usually pushes against the root of the spinal nerve, and that's going to cause some problems. And then the last type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. And I think by now you can kind of tell from the first name what elastic cartilage does. Yeah, of course, it's elastic. And you'll notice that also that it's not located in a lot of places. As a matter of fact, there's only 2 locations listed in the textbook. One location is talking about your ears, and the other one is talking about the epiglottis of your voice box, which is a little flap that keeps food out, keeps you from choking on food when you inhale. Elastic cartilage, very unique substance because it's only located in 2 different places that we really care about in this class. And you'll notice that elastic cartilage, it can bend and then it can return back to its normal shape and state. So it's a pretty handy substance to have around. And then the last type of connective tissue we have is bone. Now, bone, I'm not really sure how much I want to spend time on bone here because we have an entire chapter dedicated to bone coming up. You're going to get enough of bone tissue, trust me. But I will say this much about bone tissue. You know, bone tissue has specialized cells in it. It's got collagen fibers in it. It's just extremely rigid. So it's like reading about concrete, except you've got cells that were able to manipulate the concrete and build little tunnels and homes within the concrete. And the coolest thing about bone tissue is that your cells make bone tissue in concentric rings. Just like, you know how you chop a tree down and you count the rings on a tree and it tells you how old that tree really is? Well, I don't know if you can look at how many rings are in someone's bone to tell how old that person is, but you can look at the width of the bone and the amount of growth that had occurred with the connective tissue down on this level, and it'll tell you a lot about that person's age and everything. So it's a pretty good connective tissue. We talked about blood already, so let's keep going. Now, before I get into muscle tissue, let me say one more thing about connective tissue. You have got to pay close attention. I feel like a broken record, man. I'm lying. I lie to you not. You've got to pay close attention to the specialized cell involved, the protein fiber involved, and the type of matrix. Okay? Let me give you an example. Let's go back for a moment. Let's give you a simple example. Dense regular connective tissue. Okay? First of all, what is the specialized cell that's here? Let me pause for a minute. What is the specialized cell? Anybody know? Okay. You're looking at that fibroblast nucleus. Now, whenever you see something that says fibroblast nucleus, remember, we live in the age of Google. We live in the age of glossaries and texts that you can get. Please Google that. Look that up. Don't just say, well, oh, I don't see the word fibroblast, so that can't be the right answer. Don't do that. In the words of the old Tex Avery cartoons, don't you believe it. All right? Fibroblast nucleus. Look that up. It's a nucleus. If you don't know anything about cell biology, which you may not know anything about cell biology, there are chapters between chapter 1 and chapter 5. There's 2, 3, and 4. You go back and you look at those chapters, you'll notice that those chapters deal with a lot of stuff with chemistry, and they deal with cells. Pick the cell chapter. Look up a nucleus. The nucleus is an organelle inside of a cell that houses all of its genetic material. And what it does is the nucleus kind of puts out this information to tell the cell what to do. So basically what you're seeing is it's trying to show you that little dot in the middle belongs to a fibroblast. So that whole dark thing there is actually a fibroblast. But that little dot in the middle of the dark thing is his nucleus. Think of it as his brain. That's the cell, that entire dark thing right there. See that? That entire dark thing is the cell. That little itty bitty dot right there in the middle is the nucleus. So, you know, don't let that throw you. Now let's go back to the original question at hand. What's the cell? Well, the cell is the fibroblast. You'll notice that some people in a picture like this, they'll say, name the specialized cell that exists in this image. And people will write fibroblast nucleus. And then the teacher will mark it wrong. And then the person will be like, well, how can that be wrong? That's what it says in the book. No. A fibroblast nucleus? No. That's like saying Mr. Nixon brain. Who was that? That's Mr. Nixon brain in the picture. Mr. Nixon brain? Yeah, Mr. Nixon brain. No, it's Mr. Nixon. That's that, you know, just because you're pointing out his brain inside his head in the picture doesn't mean that that's the person. He's Mr. Nixon, not Mr. Nixon brain. And that's how it sounds when you say that the answer is fibroblast nucleus. It's not a fibroblast nucleus. That cell is a fibroblast. All right? So that tells me what type of cell we're looking at. Now, what kind of matrix do we have here? Well, The matrix here, do you see much matrix? Nah, not much matrix at all. You don't see a whole lot of fluid. Actually, you see a whole lot of fiber. All you keep seeing is that the collagen fibers take these big brackets to show you how much fiber is actually there. All of that fiber and very, 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 very little ground substance. So if there's that much collagen fiber, and collagen fiber is solid, it's rigid, it's built for protection, it's like rope. Ground substance, on the other hand, is not built for strength. Ground substance is more of a viscous fluid. It's oily in its feel, sticky to a point. There's very little ground substance, whole lot of collagen fiber, lots of rope. So that tells me what the consistency of the tissue is going to be. It's going to be really tough because there's a lot of rope and it has living cells in it. Okay? That's what I mean by when you go back to look at connective tissues, especially when you're getting ready for a test. Here, pay close attention to the cells, the fibers, and the matrix involved. You want to kind of, that'll keep you out of trouble. It really will. And it'll help you understand this thing for your lab and your lecture test. Now, with all that said and done, let me touch on the muscle tissue and the nervous tissue, and then we'll kind of wrap this thing up and come to a close, and maybe I can answer some questions later on. Muscle tissue, what is its claim to fame? Muscle tissue is all about movement. All right? Please, whatever you do, don't select muscle tissue as an answer to a test question that asks you what type of tissue would connect muscle to bone. Don't put muscle, okay? Because muscle tissue is not about connecting. Muscle tissue is about moving. That's what muscle tissue does. It's all about movement. When we get to the muscle tissue chapter, I will teach you about the law of ludicrous, all right? And you'll understand what in the world I'm talking about with the law of ludicrous. Trust me, it's cool. So when you have muscle tissue, you have to break it down into 3 types. The type of muscle tissue that we will discuss the most in 210 will be skeletal muscle tissue. The 2 types of muscle tissue that you will discuss the most in 211 will be cardiac muscle tissue and smooth muscle tissue. Believe it. All right. So skeletal muscle tissue, there's an entire chapter dedicated to nothing but skeletal muscle tissue, and we will be taught through that chapter later on. Skeletal muscle tissue is all about moving you. Most of your skeletal muscle is attached to bone, and so it moves you. Biceps in your arms, triceps in your arms, hamstring muscles in your thigh, quad muscles in your thigh, adductor muscles, gastrocnemius muscles, your palmaris muscles, your zygomaticus muscles, your orbicularis oculi muscles. All these different muscles are making you move. Facial expressions, lifting your arms, lifting your legs, lifting your hands, extending your fingers, flexing your fingers, flicking somebody off on the interstate. Please don't do that, all right? That's skeletal muscle. It's all about making you move. And so when you look at skeletal muscle, you'll notice that it's very dense. It's full of muscle fibers or muscle cells. Muscle fiber and muscle cell are the same thing because the cells are shaped like long strings of spaghetti. They're very, very long cells. And the cells themselves are full of protein fibers. So when you're looking at muscle tissue, the muscle cells have the protein fibers inside of them. Ah, yeah, crazy, ain't it? See, when you were looking at connective tissue, you had cells, and then you had protein fibers, and both of them were sitting in this matrix, suspended in it. Okay, so it was like making a bowl of fruit. You threw all these different things together, and then whatever. It's like a bowl of fruit, and you're rinsing the bowl of fruit in some water. So you put all the fruit in there, and then you pour the water in there. The blueberries that you put in there were the blueberries, and the strawberries were the cells, the specialized cells. The carrot sticks and the celery sticks, which celery and carrot sticks aren't fruit, but that's another story for another day. So the celery And the carrots, those sticks in the bowl, those can be your protein fibers. But the water that you poured in there, that's the matrix that everybody's suspended in. Notice that the protein fibers are floating right beside the cells. In muscle tissue, that's not the case. The protein fibers are actually inside of the cells. So when you look at a skeletal muscle cell, to find the protein fibers, they're actually inside of the cell, which is part of the reason why skeletal muscle fibers are so long, because they're full of these protein fibers inside of them, and they actually shorten and contract to help you move. Cardiac muscle tissue works very similarly in the fact that they also have protein fibers inside of the cells, and they're very tightly packed together. However, they're more branched. They're less elongated. They're more so branched. They're a lot shorter, and they're connected end to end. And the only place you're going to find cardiac muscle tissue is in your heart. That's it. They're not found anywhere else, only in your heart. And then the last cell, last muscle cell, is smooth muscle tissue, which smooth muscle cells, they don't really have a elongated appearance at all. As a matter of fact, when you get the cells interconnected with one another, they give the tissue a smooth appearance, which is why we call it smooth muscle tissue. You'll also notice that in the text that smooth muscle is located inside of a lot of hollow organs. So you find it inside your bladder, you find it inside of uterus, you find it inside the stomach, you find it inside blood vessels, you find it inside of your large intestine, you find it inside of hollow organs, organs that do a lot of work, but they pass things through or they store things. That's where you find smooth muscle. And smooth muscle doesn't contract the same way that cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle do. Instead, they use waves like peristalsis to kind of squeeze and move things around. The last tissue we got, nervous tissue, right? Nervous tissue is a very complex tissue to talk about, which is why we're not going to spend a lot of time on it in this particular chapter. Nervous tissue is really all about the neuron. Did you know that about 97 to 98% of all the neural tissue in your body is in your brain? Yeah, literally. Somewhere between 97, about 97% of all the neurons, every single one of those cells that you see in that picture in front of you, 97% of all of them are just in your brain. Yes, believe it. So most of the neural tissue is in your brain. Now, where's the rest of it? Your spinal cord and your nerves, pretty much. Spinal cord, nerves, special senses like your eyes. You'll find some neurons there. Neurons, they make up. They're the primary structural or functional unit of nervous tissue. If you have nervous tissue, it is because you have neurons. There's no such thing as nervous tissue and no neurons. So you've got this nervous tissue, which are neurons, and these are specialized cells that basically communicate with one another using electrical signals. So even the simple thing as a thought or memory, all of that is a bunch of neurons sending organized pattern electrical signals to dictate a memory about a thing. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, you'll notice that this last part here, where it talks about defining an organ, explaining the roles of different tissues in an organ, and explaining the structure and function of these membranes. Okay, let me tell you something about this, and I might come back in here and talk about membranes. Here, as a matter of fact, I'll talk about membranes in a separate video. Let me say something about this organ thing. If you take a group of tissues, and these tissues work together, they will form an organ. There is an image in your textbook like this one, and what it does is it shows a little stomach over here, and it says, okay, what types of tissues make up your stomach? Well, what they do is they take a segment of the wall of the stomach, they cut it away, and they show you that you actually use all 4 types of tissue just to make your stomach. This is where things get complex. This is where you tend to lose students, and it's not a student's fault. You have got to begin to change the way you think. as of this moment forward. You have to start thinking integrative, all right? And what I mean by integrative is we do it when we watch sports all the time. For example, the Miami Heat versus the San Antonio Spurs, all right, great. When you look at a basketball team, generally a basic basketball team is made up of a point guard, shooting guard, small forward or wingman, power forward, and a center. All right. As much as they want to change the names of those 5 people, the positions don't really change. The positions generally stay the same. Some people redefine the roles after a while, but they're generally the same 5 positions. If you notice that a team who figures out their 5 positions and they work them well, you don't usually pay close attention to the position. You pay close attention to the team. A really good basketball team doesn't have positions that stand out, but they have a team that stands out. You take all 5 of those different roles and you meld them into one and you make a team. Tissue types are the same way. You figure out and you learn each one of the different tissue types, and you come to find out how all 4 of them can come together and form one organ and then help that organ to function. For example, look at this. This area right here is completely and totally epithelial tissue. All of that is epithelial tissue. Every last bit of it. All of that is, see that right there? See all the purple? See the purple? That's all epithelial tissue, man. Every last bit of it is all epithelial tissue. Now, what's funny is you're looking at all this epithelial tissue, and then if you look below this, all of this is a type of connective tissue. And it's got blood vessels suspended in it, and you've got this connective tissue. And the connective tissue takes the epithelial tissue and attaches it to a layer of smooth muscle, which happens to be below here. But in between the smooth muscle, you notice some yellowish stuff there. Those are nerve fibers. So you've got nervous tissue in between the layers of the smooth muscle tissue, which is right below this dense irregular connective tissue, who is connecting the epithelial tissue to the other 3 layers. They can't live without one another. It's not advantageous for them to go out alone. They need to be together, and they actually help one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this guy up. I'm going to wrap this video up. I'm going to call it quits. We're going to come back in here. We're going to make an entirely different video. Based on, yeah, and I am sitting in the dark, and yes, we have been talking this long where the sun is now setting outside. But we'll come back in here. We'll start on another video to kind of talk about the membranes. It's been good talking to you guys. I'll talk to you soon.